They called it home. But for me, it was a prison disguised in walls, where love was rationed and silence was survival. I wasn't born into love, I was born into obligation. In my parents' eyes, I was never a daughter to be cherished. I was an accident they dressed in hand-me-downs and quiet expectations. My mother believed softness was a sign of weakness. My father, when not buried in his ledgers or vodka, reminded me that daughters were burdens unless married off. They never hit me. No. Their weapons were colder, indifference, comparison, the constant reminder that I was never enough. They adored my brother, his grades, his charm, his future. I, on the other hand, was the shadow that walked behind, cleaning dishes, folding laundry, tending wounds no one ever saw. When I told them I loved books, they laughed. Books won't feed you. Marry well, and stay quiet. That's a woman's path. So when I met Elias, I mistook attention for affection. He was kind, soft-spoken, and came from a respected family. His mother wore pearls, and his father sat on charity boards. To me, their world looked like security. I thought, maybe this is my escape. It wasn't. From the moment I stepped into his family's house, I knew I was unwelcome. His mother's gaze stripped me bare, my simple dress, my accent, my silence. She smiled with her lips but never with her eyes. His father, always polite, always distant. And Elias, sweet Elias, said nothing. When she scolded me for overcooking the rice at dinner, he stayed quiet. When she told guests I came from an unfortunate background, he laughed it off, like it was nothing. When I was late coming home from the market because I'd fainted in the heat while carrying their groceries, she said I was lazy. Elias never touched me in anger, but he never touched me in protection either. I washed their curtains until my hands cracked from bleach. I folded linens while listening to them plan vacations I was never invited to. I woke at dawn, pregnant and dizzy, to prepare meals for a household that never thanked me. When I finally told Elias I was expecting, he blinked like I'd handed him a bill he didn't ask for. And when I miscarried alone, in the cold bathroom, because no one picked up my calls, they said I was careless, that I should have been more careful. My own mother told me, it happens. At least now you can still look slim for the next suitor, if this one ever throws you out. I died that day, not physically, but emotionally. And it was in that silence, in that void of love and protection, that a different part of me was born. Not Anya the invisible, not Anya the burden, but Anya, the observer, the planner, the woman who would one day make them all remember. Chapter 2. The day I walked away. Sometimes, it's not the scream that signals the end. It's the silence, the moment you stop begging to be seen. The morning I left, no one noticed. Not even the dog barked. I remember the chill of the tiles beneath my feet, the way the curtains swayed slightly from a window left ajar, and the sound of breakfast being served for them, not for me. My mother-in-law's voice echoed in the dining room, crisp and commanding, already assigning blame for things I hadn't done. Elias was scrolling on his phone, dressed in a shirt I had ironed the night before with trembling hands. I didn't cry. Not anymore. My tears had long since dried up, like the flowers I used to press between pages of books. No one let me read. I walked past them with a duffel bag, old, frayed, packed in silence. No one asked where I was going. No one looked up. And that, more than the words they'd thrown at me, more than the punishments of cold dinners and colder stares, was what shattered something inside me. I was invisible to the people I had once tried so desperately to please. I stepped outside, into a world that felt wider than I'd remembered. The air was sharp, almost defiant against my skin. I had no plan, no money, except a few crumpled bills I had stashed from sewing small hems for neighbors who paid in coins and pity. No family, because mine had washed their hands of me the moment I refused to return to fix things with Elias. And no child, only the ache of a name I had whispered to myself at night, the child who never got a chance to breathe. But I had something new. I had emptiness, and that emptiness felt clean. There's something sacred about being broken. When your reflection no longer recognizes you, when every piece of you has been shattered and scattered by the hands you once trusted, you get to rebuild from scratch. And this time, you choose the shape, the color, the armor. I slept that night on the floor of a women's shelter, surrounded by strangers with haunted eyes like mine. Some ran from fists, some from words, some like me from silence. They didn't ask questions, And for once, I didn't have to explain why I flinched at soft voices or hesitated before accepting a blanket. I began again with nothing. But I began. I took a job washing dishes at a late-night diner where no one cared who I had once been. The steam scalded my fingers, the hours were cruel, but for the first time in years, the pain felt like mine, not something inflicted, but something endured for a purpose. And with each passing day, with each plate scrubbed, I wrote plans in my head. I learned to watch, to listen, to save, to strategize. The woman they discarded was gone. What was left was a storm gathering in silence. And one day, they would hear me again, not begging, not apologizing, but standing tall and unrecognizable. Chapter 3. A name no one knew to disappear properly. You don't run, you dissolve. I changed my name. It was the first act of rebellion, the first decision that was mine and mine alone. I stood before a cracked mirror in a government building, holding the form in trembling fingers, and crossed out the name Anya like it was a curse someone else had written on my skin. I chose Leona. It meant lioness. Not that I felt strong, not yet, but names carry echoes, and I needed to start whispering courage into my own bones. From that moment, Leona began to rise slowly, quietly, beneath the tattered remnants of the woman they left behind. I enrolled in a night class at the community center. Computer basics, taught by a man who wore the same coffee-stained sweater every day and didn't care that I was always the last to arrive and the first to leave. By day I still scrubbed dishes, hands red and cracked from soap and steam. By night I typed with stiff fingers and taught myself how to create resumes, write formal emails, understand spreadsheets. Every cent I earned went into a jar under the floorboard of the tiny room I rented above a laundromat that smelled of mold and detergent. No furniture, just a mattress, a kettle, and a notebook filled with ideas. I stopped looking in mirrors. I didn't recognize myself yet, not in a good way. But inside, beneath the layers of exhaustion and survival, something was building, a sense of purpose sharper than pain. Then came the library. It was an old building with yellowed walls and more silence than visitors. But in its quiet corners, I devoured books on business, psychology, digital marketing. I read about family law, financial abuse, emotional coercion, words I hadn't known when I was living them, but now gave shape to the ache I had carried for years. I wasn't just learning. I was mapping their weaknesses. I knew Elias's world still revolved around appearances. The company his family owned thrived on brand and reputation, and his mother still sat on charity boards with a face full of fake kindness. But I also knew secrets, old ones, hidden ones, whispers I had heard through closed doors, documents I had once helped organize, transactions I had seen but never dared to question. Now I was remembering everything. And more importantly, I was documenting. Step by step, I built a new identity. I offered freelance work under a fake name, helping small businesses clean up their digital presence. I was good at it, sharp, quiet, unnoticed. Exactly the way I wanted it. No one knew who Leona was. But soon, they would feel her shadow. One night, sitting by the window, sipping instant coffee and watching the rain stain the glass, I opened a new document on my cheap laptop. At the top I wrote, Operation Echo. Because everything they had done, every cut, every silence, every betrayal was coming back. And this time, it would echo so loud, they'd finally hear me. The best kind of revenge doesn't shout. It listens, it studies. Then it strikes where it hurts the most, your pride. They thought I was dead. That was their first mistake. The second was forgetting that I was always listening. I started with the man who thought he was too small to matter, Gregor, Elias's cousin, a financial manager in the family's investment branch. He had always been a smug little man, sneaking glances at me during dinners like I was just another thing his family owned. But he drank too much and spoke too freely, and I remembered how he used to brag about shaving off funds to cover debts. So I found the files. I found the names, and I sent them to just the right tax authority in just the right country. No fingerprints, no return address, just numbers that didn't add up. Gregor was suspended within the week. It barely made the news. A line in the business section, but it was enough. A tremor, a whisper of instability in a family obsessed with control. Next came Camille, Elias's mother. She once told me, eyes cold, lips pursed, that not every woman is built to be a wife. What she meant was, you are not enough for us. She'd smiled as she said it, serving tea in the same porcelain set that I had polished for hours. Now, I watched her from afar, still playing philanthropist, still basking in applause. But beneath the surface, her name was attached to a foundation with questionable donation flows. One late night, I submitted an anonymous tip to an investigative journalist who had been trying to dig into charity fraud. I even gave him the name of a former disgruntled employee someone Camille had fired ruthlessly years ago. The headline came 3 weeks later. Lady of Virtue or Master of Vanity. Inside the web of the Verhoeven Foundation, it didn't accuse, but it questioned. And that was enough. Tea dinner parties. She started getting fewer invitations. Her image, so meticulously built, now had a crack. And Elias? Elias was next. But he was also last. Because he was the hardest to destroy. Not because he was smart. He wasn't. But because once, I had loved him. Or at least, I had loved the idea of him. And it's hard to burn something you once built a home around. So I didn't start with fire. I started with whispers, a review anonymously submitted about misconduct in one of his music production contracts, a sudden drop in social media following after a mysterious leak showing how he had once mocked a young contestant on his show behind her back. I watched it all unfold like a conductor leading a silent orchestra. Behind the scenes, I built a network of voices, young artists, mostly women whom Elias and his company had dismissed, underpaid, or quietly silenced. I gave them resources, legal templates, press contacts, courage. Soon, the silence broke. They spoke. And Elias had no script for it. I didn't need to show my face. I just needed to be the echo behind their voices. The woman they discarded had become the shadow they couldn't escape. And I was just getting started. The wife they discarded. When a man forgets the damage he's done, he fears the shadows even in broad daylight. They say guilt comes quietly. But I watched Elias unravel in silence that wasn't quiet at all. He was jittery now, constantly checking his phone, snapping at assistants, flinching every time a new article dropped. I knew his habits better than he did. Elias Verhoeven didn't fear consequences. He feared humiliation, and humiliation was exactly what he was being served: slow, measured, in palatable bites the media loved to taste. The anonymous testimonies were gaining traction. The video leaks, the unfair contracts, the verbal abuse, caught off Mick, each one a thread in a tapestry of ruin. His PR team scrambled. They blamed editing, context, cancel culture. But deep down, Elias knew this wasn't a coincidence. This was surgical. Behind the screen, I watched from my rented flat in Amsterdam, sipping tea brewed from the same herbs Camille once said smelled to pour. I let the heat of the porcelain seep into my palms. I was calm, colder than I ever thought I could be. Then I opened my email. One of the girls I had supported, Leona, 19, bullied off a show Elias judged, had just won her first independent music award. In her acceptance speech, she said, "I used to think I wasn't enough, but someone reminded me that I wasn't the problem. The system was. Thank you to the person who believed in me when no one else would. You know who you are." I didn't cry. I smiled. And then I pressed send. Attached was a document one I'd spent 6 months compiling. Financial discrepancies, non-disclosure violations, shady offshore transfers. And it didn't go to the press. It went to the authorities. Let Camille and her spotless tablecloths explain this one. Meanwhile, Elias was trying to fight shadows. He hired a private investigator to find who was behind the coordinated attack. He traced burner accounts, searched public records. He even tried to contact my parents, but they had long buried the shame of me. To them, I was a chapter erased, a daughter too troublesome to remember. And so when his P brought him a grainy photo of a woman walking out of a community arts center in Antwerp, a woman who looked oddly familiar, Elias stared at it for hours. He didn't sleep that night. He couldn't, because something in him whispered what he didn't dare believe, that maybe, just maybe, the ghost was real, and she was watching. You thought I disappeared, but I was only learning how to be invisible and sharp. The picture landed on Camille's oakwood dining table silently, like a curse. She didn't touch it, didn't even blink, but I could imagine the color drain from her powdered cheeks. "She's dead," she whispered after a long pause. Elias said nothing. He was staring at the photo me, or rather the version of me now, walking out of the arts center, hair shorter, eyes harder, wearing the kind of calm that came only from surviving fire. He wanted to speak. But what would he say? That I was haunting him in daylight? That his sins had grown legs and returned with heels and lipstick? Instead, he muttered, It's not her. Just someone who looks like her. Camille scoffed. No one comes back from that kind of disgrace. But shame, unlike death, is not final. Back in my studio, I wasn't watching the news today. I was watching old footage, wedding videos, anniversaries, family Christmases where I served food I didn't eat and smiled through insults dressed as jokes. One video showed me pregnant, belly round, sitting alone at the corner of a party. No one beside me. Elias dancing with his cousin's wife, his hand just a little too low on her back. Camille giving me a sideways glance and whispering something into her wine. I closed the laptop slowly. I no longer cried over these things. Now, I studied them. Like data. I used them to understand the enemy not out of hatred, but precision. Because revenge, when done right, is not rage, it's strategy. The next step. A charity gala. Camille was hosting it, of course, dressed in blood-red silk. Speaking of community, values, faith, and other words she polished like pearls. And who was one of the silent sponsors? Alira van der Meer. My new name. My new mask. I stood in the crowd that night, dressed in muted navy, nothing attention-grabbing, just present. Camille didn't recognize me, neither did Elias. But they felt something. I saw it in the slight hitch of his breath, the way her eyes narrowed just a fraction when I walked past. The storm hadn't broken yet, but the wind had changed. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. Who are you really? I stared at the message and typed 3 words, you'll remember soon. And then I turned off my phone, because the most terrifying thing is not knowing who your enemy is. The second most terrifying? Realizing it might be the woman you once left bleeding on a cold marble floor. And she's smiling now. People don't vanish. They watch, they wait, and then they return. Camille's fingers trembled slightly as she stirred her tea, porcelain, clinking against porcelain. It was a minor sound, barely a whisper, but in the cavernous quiet of the dining room, it was thunder. Across the table, Elias kept glancing toward the window, not because he expected to see someone, but because some primal part of him feared that he might. That was always the most fragile part of guilt. Not the shame, not the regret, but the dread of being seen. Who sent that photo? Camille asked, her voice sharper than the rim of the teacup. You think it's her, don't you? Elias said nothing, because in his heart he knew. That walk, that gaze, the set of her jaw, it was her. Changed, hardened, returned from the ashes, but admitting it aloud would unravel everything. She's gone, Camille insisted, her voice louder now, as if saying it firmly could make it true. That girl was weak. This woman is dangerous. Meanwhile, I was already 2 steps ahead. My next move wasn't grand. It was surgical, a quiet donation to a women's shelter that Camille's charity fund had once promised to support but never actually did. The donation came with attached press photos and just enough insider tips to land Camille on a local investigative podcast titled Virtue in Velvet, The Faces Behind the Facades. A small scandal. Nothing explosive, but cracks had begun to form. Camille's perfect housewife empire of moral superiority started to feel unstable. And Elias? He was spiraling, quietly. He couldn't sleep. His hands shook while shaving. He began keeping the lights on in their walk-in closet. Every knock on the door made his spine stiffen like glass about to shatter. You see, I wasn't rushing. No need to storm their castle. I was removing bricks one by one until the whole thing would collapse under the weight of their own sins. One night, he found an envelope on his car windshield. No address, no name, just a single printed image. The sonogram from our lost child, with my name still faintly visible in the hospital watermark, and below it, a line in neat cursive. For every silence you chose, I remember. He dropped the paper, sank into the driver's seat, and for the first time in years he cried, not because he missed me, but because he realized the ghost of the woman he betrayed was not only alive, she had never stopped watching, and now, she was writing her own ending. The wife they discarded. Revenge isn't a fire. Its mold, it grows quietly in darkness, and it eats through the foundation. I returned to the town not with fanfare, not with fury, but with the poise of someone who had already won. And no one recognized me. Not the baker who once refused to serve me when Camille stood behind me in line. Not the old neighbor who called me the charity case and warned his daughter to stay away from women like her. They didn't see me, but I saw them. Every single one. The real plan was never just about Elias or Camille. It was about the rot beneath their carefully painted walls. Elias's older sister Dahlia had built a reputation as a life coach for elite women. She taught resilience, feminine grace, family loyalty. Her entire brand was based on the illusion of the perfect upper-class wife and mother. And yet, years ago, when I had nowhere to go, pregnant, sobbing at her doorstep, she closed the door in my face, literally. I remembered the exact sound of the latch locking from the inside. That was the night I started to change. So now, I booked a private coaching session with her under a pseudonym. Dahlia looked at me, makeup pristine, posture perfect, never realizing the ghost she'd locked out was sitting across from her. I want to know, I said, voice soft but steady, how you deal with guilt you can't admit to. The kind that clings to you even when you smile for the cameras. She blinked, just once, then twice, a flicker in her confident smile. Darling, we all carry burdens, she said, brushing imaginary dust off her dress. But guilt is a weakness. Learn to reframe the story. I leaned in, whispered, some stories reframe you. And then I left her my real name tucked beneath the cushion she sat on. By the next day, her assistant had mysteriously leaked a recording of Dahlia giving shallow advice to a grieving widow, mocking her behind her back. The internet was unforgiving. Her podcast was suspended. Brand partnerships paused. And in her mirror, I knew she'd start seeing my eyes. Meanwhile, Elias tried to gather the fragments. He reached out to his cousin, one of the few who once showed me kindness. But it was too late. People around them were beginning to talk. Why were strange photos appearing in old family albums? Why were Camille's emails being anonymously forwarded to her sponsors? Why did their housekeeper quit, citing spiritual unrest? Elias stayed up at night, scrolling through anonymous blogs, searching for patterns, clues. He was smart enough to know this wasn't random. He was terrified enough to suspect the truth. But what truly broke him? A private email from a burner address. Subject: forgiveness has an expiration date. Attachment: a voice recording of Camille mocking my miscarriage at a family dinner, laughing as if pain were entertainment. When he heard his mother's laughter in the background, he vomited. That was the night I knew he broke inside. But unlike the past this time, no one would come help him up. And me? I stood at a distance, watching them rot in the house they once locked me out of. One by one, I wasn't destroying them. I was simply letting their real selves be seen. And in a world built on image and reputation that was more lethal than fire, some women don't just survive. They bloom in the places they were once buried. 6 months later, the headlines told a very different story. Major pharma heiress investigated for embezzlement and abuse allegations. Community center expose reveals network of exploitation. Mystery whistleblower triggers multi-agency probe into family-owned charities. I never attached my name to any of it. Didn't need to. Truth has a habit of echoing louder when spoken by a chorus of victims finally heard. Camille lost her funding. Her sender was raided. Her socialite friends vanished like perfume in the wind. Even his mother, Lady Margaret, faced public scrutiny for years of fraudulent donations made in Leona's name. And Elias, he tried to visit me once again. I declined, not out of vengeance, but because I had nothing left to say. The little greenhouse on the outskirts of Devon bloomed each spring. It was small, humble, nestled behind a cottage where the wind always smelled of lavender and ink. Inside, children from bruised homes came every Sunday to learn how to grow something with their own hands and write their own stories. That's where I spent my mornings now. Not behind courtrooms or campaigns, but with soil under my nails and warmth in my chest. A girl named Ellie once asked me, "Miss Leona, do you believe broken people can really become whole again?" I paused, thought of bruises fading, of nights once filled with silence, now echoing with laughter, and I told her this. No one becomes whole, Ellie. We become new, stronger at the cracks, like stained glass, never perfect, but more beautiful for the light we let through. Final note from Leona: I never got justice in a courtroom. I never stood on a podium or claimed fame, but I got something rarer: peace, and the power to give what I once needed most to others still clawing their way out. So if you ever find yourself discarded, unheard and seen, remember, you are not broken, you are becoming.